I never imagined that my life, which seemed full of love and promise, would turn into a waking nightmare. When I married the man of my dreams, I thought I was stepping into a beautiful future filled with happiness, mutual respect, and a family of our own. But the reality was far from what I had hoped. What started as a simple compromise turned into a never-ending cycle of pain, humiliation, and loneliness. I endured 3 long years of torment under my mother-in-law's iron grip, ignored by the very man who had once sworn to cherish me. I lost everything, even the ability to have children, all because of their cruelty. Yet, just when I thought my life was over, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. A single moment, a shocking revelation, and a long overdue confrontation turned the tables entirely, bringing justice where it was due, and finally granting me the freedom I had long been denied. My name is Kristen. At 25, I married Scott, a man 3 years older than me, whom I had adored since our university days. I had fallen for him at first sight and pursued him relentlessly, never giving up until he finally saw me in the same light. When he proposed, I was over the moon. I believed I had won the love of a lifetime, a man who was not only handsome but kind-hearted and responsible. I dreamed of a happy home with him, filled with warmth, love, and children. However, the dream began to crack the moment we got married. The first sign that my perfect life was not going to be so perfect came in the form of an unexpected request. No, a demand. "It's okay if we live with Mom, right? Dad's passed away and she'd be alone otherwise," Scott said casually, as though it were a minor detail. I was taken aback. Before marriage, we had never discussed living arrangements in detail, but I had assumed we would find a place of our own. After all, I had been living independently, and I had envisioned our new life beginning in a home that belonged to just the two of us. "Huh? Aren't we going to live by ourselves?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Scott sighed as if I was being difficult. "Actually, Mom told me that if we were to get married, living together was a prerequisite." A prerequisite? I had never heard of this before. The idea that such a crucial decision had already been made without my input felt like a slap in the face. What made it worse was the fact that my mother-in-law, Evelyn, had never seemed particularly fond of me. From our very first meeting, she had barely spoken to me, offering only the necessary pleasantries. At the wedding, she had worn a forced smile, but her eyes had been cold. I could tell she disapproved of me, though I didn't understand why. I had hoped that with time, she would warm up to me. But now, realizing that I would have to live under the same roof as her indefinitely, a pit formed in my stomach. Despite my growing unease, Scott brushed off my concerns with an easy smile. "What's the problem? Mom will love you once she gets to know you better. Don't worry about it." I wanted to believe him, to trust that things would work out. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. I moved into Scott's family home, telling myself that love was about compromise, that this was just a temporary adjustment. But deep down, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. It didn't take long for my fears to be confirmed. From the moment I stepped into that house, Evelyn made it clear that I was unwelcome. "Sai, your cooking isn't very good, is it?" she remarked one evening, scrunching her nose in distaste. "To spend so much time making such tasteless food?" I clenched my fists, swallowing my frustration. "But it took so long because you asked me to clean in the middle of cooking." "Are you talking back?" she snapped, narrowing her eyes. "Just because you're young and my son likes you, don't get cocky, you incompetent girl." That was only the beginning. Evelyn seemed to take pleasure in making my life difficult. She forced me to quit my job, insisting that a woman's place was at home. She piled every household chore on me, treating me like a servant. If I spent hours cleaning, she would deliberately spill flour or knock over a vase just to make me do it again. If I cooked a meal, she would throw it out, complaining it wasn't to her taste. She made snide remarks about everything I did, and worst of all, she made sure Scott never saw any of it. When I tried to confide in my husband, hoping he would stand up for me, his response was always the same. "I'll talk to her," he would say dismissively. But he never did. I quickly realized that I was alone in this. My days were filled with endless work and constant criticism, and my nights were spent crying into my pillow, wondering if this was really the life I had signed up for. But amidst all the misery, there was one glimmer of hope: Vanessa, Scott's younger sister. Unlike her mother, Vanessa was kind and outspoken. "I can't believe it. You're leaving everything to Kristen, Mom. You can move too. You need to share the work." "It's fine. Kristen wants to do it," Evelyn replied lazily from her seat on the sofa. "That can't be true." Vanessa turned to Scott. "And you need to properly scold Mom too." "Why am I getting scolded?" Scott whined. Vanessa rolled her eyes and joined me in the kitchen, helping me with the chores. "Let's do it together," she said with a warm smile. I clung to her kindness like a lifeline. Vanessa had always been fond of me, ever since I had helped her get to an important job interview when we first met. She had been lost at a train station looking panicked as she checked her watch over and over again. When I learned she was running late for the final interview at her dream company, I didn't hesitate. I offered her a ride. She made it on time, got the job, and ever since then, she had treated me like an older sister. "I'll always be on your side," she had told me. Her presence in the house was my only source of comfort. But even with her support, things only got worse. And then, one day, my world came crashing down completely. I had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and when I found out I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. My hands trembled as I dialed Scott's number, excitement bubbling in my chest. "Honey, I'm pregnant," I announced. "That's great. I'm going to be a dad." His voice was filled with genuine happiness, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was what we needed to bring us closer. Maybe now, Scott would start paying more attention to me and our future together. But Evelyn's reaction was cold. She barely acknowledged the news, instead increasing my workload, sending me on exhausting errands, and making me lift heavy objects despite my condition. I tried to endure it, thinking it was just her usual cruelty. But then, on a day when my belly had already grown big, the unthinkable happened. "Geez, you're so slow. You're in the way," she snapped in irritation before suddenly shoving me from behind. I lost my balance. My body lurched forward, and before I could react, I slammed against the edge of the table, my stomach taking the full force of the impact. Pain. Blinding, unbearable pain. I collapsed to the floor, my vision swimming. My hands clutched my stomach instinctively as a terrible, gut-wrenching realization set in. Something was very, very wrong. I called an ambulance myself. Evelyn had already disappeared into her room, leaving me there, gasping for breath. The test results were worse than I could have imagined. Not only had I miscarried, but I had also lost the ability to have children forever. The pain of losing my baby was unbearable, but the moment the doctor told me I would never be able to conceive again, something inside me shattered. I felt hollow, as if my very essence had been stripped away, leaving behind nothing but a shell of the woman I once was. I lay in that cold hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind unable to process what had just happened. I had dreamed of motherhood for as long as I could remember, envisioned the tiny fingers wrapping around mine, the soft coos of a newborn, the joy of watching a child grow. But in a single cruel moment, that dream was ripped away from me, not by fate, not by illness, but by the very woman who was supposed to be my family. Scott arrived hours later, his face lined with concern, but something about his expression felt off. It wasn't devastation or grief. It was discomfort, as if he had just been burdened with an unexpected inconvenience. He took my hand, but his grip lacked the warmth I had so desperately needed. "Kristen, I'm so sorry," he said, but the words were empty. There was no fire in his voice, no rage at his mother, no demand for justice. It was just a statement, a formality, a duty he had to fulfill before moving on. I waited for him to say what I longed to hear, that he had confronted Evelyn, that he had raged at her for what she had done, that he had packed our bags and told me we were leaving that house forever. But none of those words came. Instead, he sighed and muttered, "Mom didn't mean to. It was an accident." An accident? I felt a surge of disbelief so strong it nearly suffocated me. I had carried our child in my womb, nurtured it with every fiber of my being, and his mother had deliberately pushed me. How could he call that an accident? How could he reduce my suffering to something so casual? My voice trembled as I asked, "She shoved me, Scott. She saw me struggling, and she pushed me. How can you call that an accident?" His jaw tightened, as if he were trying to contain his frustration, not at his mother, but at me. "You know how she is," he said, his tone bordering on exasperation. "She can be harsh, but she didn't mean any harm." A cold realization seeped into my bones. He wasn't going to stand up for me. He wasn't going to fight for the child we had lost. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. It had never been me. I had fought so hard for this marriage, sacrificed so much, endured endless humiliation, all for a man who couldn't even defend me when his own mother destroyed our future. That night, I lay in my hospital bed numb. I had no more tears left to cry. I had spent years pouring my heart into this marriage, hoping Scott would see my worth, that Evelyn would one day accept me, that things would get better. But it was all a lie, an illusion I had clung to out of desperation. I wasn't a wife to Scott. I was a convenience, a maid for his mother. A woman who had given everything and received nothing in return. I thought back to my life before marriage, before I had let myself be swallowed by this toxic family. I had been strong once, independent, capable. I had dreams, ambitions, and the ability to stand up for myself. Where had that woman gone? Had I let them break me so completely that I had forgotten who I was? As the morning light filtered through the hospital window, I made a decision. I was done waiting for Scott to be the husband he should have been. I was done enduring Evelyn's cruelty. I was done living in a house that had stolen my happiness, my dignity, and my child. It was time to take my life back. The moment I was discharged, Scott drove me home in silence. He tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away, staring out of the window. My mind was already racing, planning, calculating. The moment we stepped into the house, I saw Evelyn lounging in the living room, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. She barely spared me a glance, but when she did, there was something in her eyes, something smug, as if she knew I had no choice but to stay, as if she had won. But she had underestimated me. Without a word, I walked past her, straight to our bedroom. Scott followed, looking confused as I pulled out a suitcase and started packing. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tinged with alarm. I zipped the suitcase and turned to him, my voice steady but firm. "I'm leaving, Scott." His brows furrowed in disbelief. "Leaving? What do you mean?" I let out a bitter laugh. "I mean exactly what I said. I'm done. I lost my child, Scott. I lost my ability to ever be a mother. And your reaction? You did nothing. You defended her. I won't spend another second in this house, in this marriage, pretending that everything is okay. Because it's not. It never was." His mouth opened and closed, struggling to find the right words. "But where will you go? You don't have a job anymore. You don't have anywhere to stay. And there it was, the final confirmation that he had never truly loved me. If he had, he wouldn't have been thinking about logistics. He would have been begging me to stay, promising to change, swearing that he would protect me from his mother. But instead, he was just pointing out that I had nothing left. He thought I would be too broken to walk away. He thought I was trapped. He was wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed the only person I knew would stand by me no matter what. Vanessa. She answered on the first ring. "Kristen," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I need your help," I admitted. "Say no more. I'm coming." 15 minutes later, Vanessa burst through the door, her face thunderous. She took one look at me, at my packed suitcase, at Scott's dumbfounded expression, and then turned to Evelyn with pure rage in her eyes. "I hope you're happy, Mom," she spat. "You pushed her to the point of no return. I've kept my mouth shut for too long, but I won't anymore. You're a monster." Evelyn scoffed, feigning indifference, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. She had never expected me to leave. She had never expected Vanessa to take my side. But it was too late now. I wasn't staying to watch her unravel. I was done. Vanessa grabbed my suitcase and led me to the door. As I stepped out of that house for the first time in years, I felt something I had forgotten existed. Freedom. I didn't know what the future held for me. I didn't have a concrete plan. But I knew one thing. I would rebuild my life. I would find happiness again. And I would make sure that Evelyn and Scott regretted ever thinking they could break me. The moment I stepped out of that house, a strange sensation washed over me, something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just relief. It was as if a massive weight had been lifted off my chest, a suffocating presence that had smothered me for far too long. The air outside smelled fresher, the sky seemed brighter, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe without feeling like I had to shrink myself to survive. I turned back one last time, taking in the house that had been both my prison and my battleground. Scott stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his lips parted as if he wanted to say something. But what could he possibly say that would change anything now? Evelyn stood behind him, arms crossed, her face set in stone, but I saw the flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't regret. No, a woman like her didn't feel remorse. It was something else. Perhaps the realization that she had lost, that despite all her efforts to break me, I was walking away stronger than ever. I didn't give them another second of my time. I turned away, stepping forward without hesitation, because this time, there was no looking back. Vanessa drove in silence for a few minutes, but I could feel her stealing glances at me, as if trying to gauge whether I was on the verge of falling apart. "Kristen," she finally said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Are you okay?" The question hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Was I okay? How could I be? I had just lost my child, my ability to ever conceive again, my marriage, my home. But at the same time, there was an undeniable sense of clarity settling over me, like I was waking up from a nightmare I had been trapped in for years. I turned to her, my voice steady but quiet. "I will be." It wasn't a promise to her. It was a promise to myself. She nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "You don't have to do this alone," she said firmly. "You're staying with me. No arguments." I opened my mouth to protest. I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to impose. But before I could say a word, she shot me a look that left no room for discussion. "I mean it, Kristen. You're my sister, and I should have spoken up a long time ago. I let Mom treat you like garbage, and I just stood by. But I'm done letting her control everything. You're not going back there. Not ever." There was such fierce protectiveness in her voice that for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I reached over and squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, a silent promise that this time, things would be different. Over the next few weeks, I learned what it meant to put myself first. It wasn't easy. There were days I woke up feeling like I had lost everything, nights where the grief hit me so hard that I thought I would drown in it. But there were also moments of strength, moments where I looked in the mirror and saw glimpses of the woman I used to be before Scott and Evelyn had chipped away at me piece by piece. Vanessa helped me find a job. Nothing glamorous, just a simple office position. But it was mine. It was a step toward independence. And with every paycheck, with every decision I made for myself, I felt a little stronger. Then one day, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw Scott's name flashing on the screen. I had ignored his calls for weeks, not ready to hear whatever excuse he had prepared. But something inside me told me to pick up this time. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I was ready to hear whatever nonsense he had to say and finally close this chapter of my life. "Kristen," he breathed, as if just hearing my voice brought him some sort of relief. I miss you. I've been thinking a lot and can we talk? Please?" A few weeks ago, I might have clung to those words, might have let myself believe there was still hope, that he had finally realized what he had lost. But now I heard them for what they were. Empty. "Scott," I said, my voice calm, unwavering. "We have nothing left to talk about." There was a beat of silence. Then, his voice dropped to a whisper. "You really mean that?" I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. "Yes, I do." And just like that, I felt the last piece of my old life slip away, not with sorrow, but with an overwhelming sense of peace. Scott might have expected me to come running back, to beg for his love, to let him worm his way back into my life. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had walked through fire and emerged unscathed. A year later, I stood on my own 2 feet, not just surviving, but thriving. I had my own apartment, a job I loved, and a sense of self-worth that no one could take from me. I had lost so much, but in the process, I had gained something even more valuable, the knowledge that I was enough, that I always had been, that I didn't need a man like Scott or the approval of a woman like Evelyn to define my worth. And as I looked out over the city skyline from my balcony, feeling the cool night breeze on my skin, I smiled, because I had won. Not in the way they had expected, not through revenge or bitterness, but by simply choosing myself. And that was the greatest victory of all.